On April 3rd, Harvard received a two-page letter from the Trump administration officials outlining initial requirements Harvard must meet in order to keep its federal funding. The demands were broad. Harvard was told to eliminate its diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, to review academic programs to address bias, to ban the use of masks at campus protests, and to cooperate fully with law enforcement and the Department of Homeland Security in policing campus unrest. The letter warned that Harvard's federal research grants and other funding would be conditional on these changes, implying that non-compliance would cost the university billions of dollars. Welcome back to Humanitas Academia, where I cover various aspects of college and university education. Thank you for your recent support on my last video covering the ongoing legal battle facing Mahmoud Halil and the Trump administration's attempted deportation of this individual. In this video, I'm going to cover the Trump administration versus Harvard federal funding showdown that is currently unfolding. If information like this on college and university is useful or educational to you, please share, like, and subscribe. Thank you very much. Let's begin. After Harvard received this two-page letter from the Trump administration, Harvard administrators found the letter vague and their lawyers asked the government for more specifics. And what came next escalated the conflict dramatically. On April 11th, a 5-page letter arrived from the Trump administration with a detailed list of demands, which were far more aggressive and sweeping than the earlier ones. This letter was signed by senior officials and warned that Harvard must comply to maintain its financial relationship with the federal government. According to reporting, the demands of this letter included shutting down all DEI programs and initiatives at Harvard, auditing the ideological viewpoints of Harvard's students, faculty, and staff, essentially ascertaining the ideological delineation of the members of Harvard, reducing the influence of certain students, faculty, and administrators that were singled out by the Trump administration, de-recognizing pro-Palestinian student groups on campus, strictly enforcing protest restrictions such as prohibiting masks, as I already mentioned, reporting on international students who violated university rules to federal immigration authorities, tightening admissions and hiring practices under federal supervision, and submitting to federal oversight for 3 years, which included an audit of Harvard's compliance efforts with the above demands. Some of these items, such as improving enforcement against genuine harassment, aligned with the need to combat antisemitism. But many of these demands go beyond combating antisemitism and aim to reshape Harvard's policies and governance in line with the administration's political priorities. Harvard officials were reportedly stunned by the scope of this letter, viewing it as an egregious overreach. It turns out that this April 11th letter was a mistake on the administration's part and was not meant to be sent to Harvard at this particular time. Days later, White House sources claimed that the letter was sent mistakenly, and this unauthorized draft was not intended to be delivered at this stage, at least. According to the New York Times, officials said they hadn't meant to dispatch this more aggressive list of demands so soon, again, implying that they would have eventually. One senior official admitted that the letter was ready to be sent, but talks with Harvard were ongoing when it was prematurely issued. This turn of events has, of course, raised questions about the competency of the Trump administration and the officials that inadvertently sent this letter to Harvard. Of course, if your position on this issue is one in favor of Harvard and against the Trump administration, this action of accidentally sending a confidential letter to the administration of Harvard before the Trump administration was ready is quite hilarious. Regardless, the damage was done and Harvard had the letter in hand, and the contents of the letter were explosive. Due to this letter, the university's top governing board met in an emergency session, and according to reports, they reached a unanimous agreement that Harvard could not accept the government's terms. This resolve was reinforced by intense pressure from Harvard's community and allies, such as faculty, various student and alumni groups, and various public rallies, for instance. On April 14th, Harvard's president, Alan Garber, released a direct statement rebuking the Trump administration's letter. This message, titled "The Promise of American Higher Education," announced that Harvard will not accept the government's proposed agreement. He did acknowledge that anti-Semitism was a problem on campus, but reaffirmed that Harvard has taken various steps over the last 15 months and had a moral duty to fight anti-Semitism, but he argued that the federal demands were the wrong remedy to this particular problem. In other words, the letter asserted that the university would not surrender its independence or its constitutional rights to the Trump administration's demands. Garber wrote that no government, regardless of which party is in power, should dictate what private universities can teach, whom they can admit and hire, and what areas of study and inquiry they can pursue. He condemned the ultimatums as assertions of power, unmoored from the law, to control teaching and learning at Harvard. He stated that many of the imposed conditions violated the First Amendment and exceeded the federal authority granted to the government under Title VI, which is the civil rights law. From my read, this initial statement stopped short of outright legal threat, but it made the university's stance very clear. The Trump administration wasted no time in retaliating. After this declaration from Harvard, the White House announced a freeze on $2.2 billion of the university's federal grants. These grants represent multi-year research contracts that Harvard expected, and they were put on hold. The administration justified the freeze by accusing Harvard of refusing to commit to meaningful change, pointing to what it called Harvard's troubling entitlement mindset. In other words, the administration argued that if Harvard wanted taxpayer money, it had to play by the rules set by the federal government. Harvard responded and warned that this cut to research would have a significant effect on vital scientific and medical research that, indeed, Harvard significantly contributes to. Things have escalated further, as on April 22nd, Harvard filed a federal lawsuit against the administration, alleging unconstitutional overreach, following the freezing of the $2.2 billion in federal grants and research contracts. The administration has also threatened to withhold an additional $1 billion in funding and revoke Harvard's tax-exempt status and restrict its ability to host international students who contribute a significant amount of revenue due to higher tuition charged to these students. These actions, from the administration's point of view, stem from Harvard's refusal to comply with federal demands, including dismantling diversity programs, altering admission policies, which Harvard have stated that they will not do. Now, this clash raises significant questions about academic freedom, federal authority, discrimination on campus, hiring practices, about the role of DEI, the role of government in policing ideological extremism, and much, much more in the higher education sector. The Trump administration insists that it's enforcing civil rights, aka Title VI, which prohibits anti-Semitism. As the Education Department stated, doing business with the federal government is a privilege. Harvard cannot expect to retain the privilege of receiving federal taxpayer dollars if they will not fulfill their civil rights responsibilities. In the administration's view, Harvard and others abandoned their obligation to protect Jewish students during the 2023 and 2024 campus protests, which warranted federal intervention. On the other side, Harvard and its supporters see this as an alarming attempt to politically police the university. They argue that the government's role in funding research does not give it a license to dictate university policy that is unrelated to that research, especially when those diktats infringe upon constitutional rights like the freedom of speech and academic self-governance. This clash between Harvard and the Trump administration has significant implications for American higher education and beyond. It is far more than just Ivy League drama that affects the 1%. It strikes at the balance of power between universities and the government, and how American society wishes to combat hate and bigotry. If the administration's approach prevails, universities might be forced to overhaul campus policies whenever a federal authority demands this or risk massive funding loss. This could be used by any political party in power, Democrat or Republican alike. This could affect everything from how colleges handle student protests, to political activism, to what they teach in their classroom and who they hire. Of course, academic freedom advocates are certainly alarmed by this. Such advocates will likely view this as a direct challenge to the independence that colleges have long enjoyed, and a direct threat to the First Amendment. On the other hand, the situation at Harvard also highlights concerns about campus anti-Semitism and student safety. The fact is that there was a point during the 2023 and 2024 campus protests that many felt that Harvard and others were not doing enough under their own power to protect Jewish students from harassment. Trump officials argue that civil rights enforcement is non-negotiable. If a school allows anti-Semitism to fester, then taxpayer dollars should be withdrawn. This resonates for those who have been alarmed by incidents of hate speech or intimidation on campuses. The real question here, though, from my point of view, is how far the enforcement can go without infringing upon other rights such as academic freedom and the First Amendment. For now, Harvard is standing firm in saying it can address anti-Semitism on its own terms and will not surrender and will seek legal recourse. The outcome of this battle could set a precedent for all other universities in the US. It will either reaffirm the autonomy of higher education, or it will empower Washington to impose social or political agenda via funding leverage. Both Harvard and the Trump administration have billions of dollars at stake here, so neither side is going to back down easily. Thus, the legal showdown could be significantly drawn out, and I'm really not sure how long this could take to reach a final conclusion. So please stay tuned, as further developments will certainly happen, and I will cover it on this channel. Thank you very much for listening, and thank you again for your support.